Welcome, everybody. Today, this is our, I think, fifth or sixth installment of our EV.Energy Labs Lunch and Learn series. Before we get started, just to let everybody know our call is being recorded today. So just so you know that, you're muted upon entry. You can unmute yourself by pressing *6 or going to the bottom of the participants window. And doing it there. So also, please introduce yourself in the chat. It'd be great to know who's on the line with us today. And you can log any questions there as well during the course of the presentation, and during the Q&A, we'll do our best to get to all of those. We really encourage you to ask questions. This program is all about collaborative learning. So just a big thank you to all of the folks from Ameren who are joining us today, as well as all of the utilities that are part of the EV.Energy Labs collaborative effort. This program is in its fourth year. It is an annual program of accelerated demonstration projects and a collaborative effort between utilities, EPRI, subject matter experts, and carefully selected startup companies that go through an application process to do these accelerated 16-week demonstrations with utilities and EPRI. So everybody learns along the way in these demonstrations. The companies, like you'll hear today, like EV.Energy, get great broad exposure to a number of utilities. We have 13 in our cohort this year. And then the utilities, because they're participating with these projects throughout the entire period, also get broad exposure to a lot of different types of technologies and the outcomes from those projects. So it allows, in a sense, utilities to try before they buy. EPRI handles the contracting, the paperwork, all that stuff, to make it pretty easy. But it also allows the startups a really great way to accelerate their commercialization pathways and really, as a whole, accelerate decarbonization efforts in the US and around the world. We have a number of international companies that are also a part of these efforts every year. So just a huge thank you to everybody, and a big thank you today to Jamie Dunkley, who's our just brilliant data scientist and EV expert at EPRI, who's been a big part of this project, and to Joseph Falone, the North American lead for EV.Energy. I would also, before we start, ask that if there are any Ameren folks on the line that have commentary or are familiar with this project and want to offer up comments or questions, feel free to pipe in. We want to hear from you. And so with that, I will turn the floor over to Joseph and Jamie. And Joseph, I believe you're kicking us off. Is that right?
Yeah, I am. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you so much to EPRI for hosting us, especially to Jamie for providing her sort of guidance and subject matter expertise through this project, and thank you also to Ameren, who hosted us for this project. Really excited to kick off. I think just really quickly we'll do some introductions. And Jamie, in her expertise, is going to provide just an overview of the managed EV charging landscape in the US. I'll then talk through a bit of the outcomes of our pilot with Ameren, and also maybe a couple of additional use cases that might be interesting to utility folks. And then I think we'll try to leave plenty of time at the end for Q&A. So just really quickly, I'm Joseph Falone. I head up the North America business at EV.Energy. EV.Energy is a certified B Corp and software startup that really looks to integrate electric vehicles into the power grid. And we do this by connecting to vehicles and chargers to manage EV charging in the home, in line with utility grid signals, time of use rates, and other criteria that the utility provides us. What makes us different from others in this space is number one, we don't just do vehicle telematics, which was the focus of this pilot. We also integrate to a number of chargers. We are actually the North American charging partner for Siemens and their new VersaCharge. And also, we are intensely driver and customer focused. So we've built and deployed an award-winning app for EV drivers to use to manage their charging. We administer marketing and rewards programs to get customers enrolled and also engage and adhere to managed charging. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. Over to Jamie.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Jamie Dunkley. I work at EPRI under the electric transportation team. I have my fingers in lots of different pots. Managed charging is one of them. So my projects range from kind of, understanding managed charging kind of uses, as well as understanding when, where, and how much people charge. So I've done a number of different studies where we actually had, data from EVs. So understanding, are they charging at home, publicly, how much, how fast? And then we're also, some of my work goes, is around understanding incentives and actions that help with EV adoption. So as you guys are all familiar with EPRI, but we work with a number of different utilities and just kind of helping support them in their EV efforts. That's me.
Great. Well, cool. Let's maybe sort of set the stage with just an introduction to managed EV charging for folks who aren't familiar. And Jamie, I'll leave it in your capable hands.
Okay. Next slide. Great. So these are really high level, but I just wanted to kind of set the stage a little bit on sort of, we've got this great pilot from EV.Energy that we can kind of really dig into, but, it's part of a wider scape of managed EV charging. And I have down in the bottom right here, managed charging is really a balance between kind of the customer preferences, EV charging, kind of what your vehicle needs, and then grid constraints. And we want to make the best of all of it. And I guess I would probably weight customer preferences at the very top. You really don't want to inconvenience or, give somebody a bad experience. So, it's really a balance of all three. So in terms of thinking about the benefits of it, I think I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but quickly, from a utility perspective, having some kind of a managed charging system, whether it's medium and heavy duty fleet or light duty fleet, it helps manage demand on your system. Through EV charging, if you are collecting data, and here's where kind of different companies vary, but if you have kind of a data stream, it helps you understand your EV drivers better, so you can offer better solutions and kind of understand where they might go in future scenarios. As we all know, kind of selling more kilowatt hours helps put downward pressure on rates. So doing that in a way where you don't have to upgrade your grid as much. So kind of being clever about when people charge and using your existing infrastructure will help with that. And then you can, through kind of integration with different renewable energy sources, you can incentivize potentially charging through times when you have excess load, such as in California with solar. So that's kind of advantages there. From the customer perspective, and Joseph will get into this as well, taking advantage of a time of use rate can help save you money, and having a company or an app or however you want to do it help facilitate that is helpful. A lot of people don't want another thing to manage. So the idea of having a company there that can help you set it and forget it, you can also do that on your car. So there are multiple ways to do it, but having that in there so you don't have to think about it is great. And it really helps the driver, if it's done correctly, just be in control of their charging. I think, that can be, if the driver doesn't understand how it works or feels like they can't manage it very well, that could be a downturn. But if the driver has a great app to work with or some kind of an interface and understands it, the driver really is in control of how they want to do it. Next slide. So yeah, there's lots of ways to manage charging. I know now, kind of, not that light duty vehicles are falling by the wayside at all. I've actually been thinking a lot about medium and heavy duty, which also is an application there. But you can manage charging through your charging station, through your EVSE. You can also do it through a plug interface. So I've given some examples here. There's Velocity, which you actually put it in your plug and it can interface either with a dumb charger or a smart charger. So it's just putting another sort of control within that stream of controls. NeoCharge is one that's will switch between two different appliances within your home. In their case, probably a dryer, because you have kind of the higher power level. Anyway, so it's a plug interface that you can kind of use to manage charging that way. You can also go through the API, which is what EV.Energy is doing. However, there's, the OEMs are talking about this as well. So, sorry, I didn't explain that very well, but there's, Tesla offers access to their API, so you can kind of get in that way. Other vehicles don't have such a publicly available access, but they're working on ways to kind of do managed charging through their systems as well. So you can interact with that kind of API with either your PC or smartphone. So there's many ways of doing it there. And then there's EPRI's working on some kind of open standards through kind of EBSEs. So similar to kind of the top one, but just making sure that that's facilitated in a way where there's kind of open standards and anybody can kind of play in that market space. Next slide. So these are all things that have come up with kind of some with this, some with other pilots of kind of just things to consider as you think about managed charging. And I guess the biggest one that I've already highlighted is kind of putting the customer first. So making sure that their needs are kind of met, and then play around with the rest of it. So a couple things that have come up over different pilots I've worked on. Customers can be sensitive to vehicle location data. So by adding another company sort of in to help manage, which has a lot of good benefits, their data is also being shared with someone else. And I think it's really about the message that happens here, but a lot of people use apps to help manage credit cards or banking. And so it's similar to that, but some people are wary of putting another partner in that space. Of course, there's lots of security surrounding that that has been thought through, but it's just kind of a perception of adding another player in that space. You have to be careful. Again, I've already sort of said this, but customers may be very sensitive to charging interruptions or kind of having insufficient charge. So putting customer needs first, very important. One thing that we found, not in this pilot, but if there's a lot of kind of data gathering when the vehicle is not otherwise turned on, there can be a small drain on the battery in that instance. So just something to keep in mind with kind of really data intensive projects. And then the last one is that, and I mentioned this in the last slide, but the way that the data is gathered is through the API access into the vehicle. Tesla offers this publicly as long as you have permission from the vehicle driver. Other OEMs don't. There are ways to kind of get data, but it's kind of having a open dialogue with the OEMs and making sure they're on board with this is really important. So currently kind of the strongest player in here is Tesla. EPRI is working with a number of OEMs to help facilitate a common platform that everybody can work together on. VGIP, Open Vehicle Grid Integration Platform. I actually forget what UDIAL stands for, so I apologize for that one. But some OEMs are also developing their own dashboard. So it's a bit of kind of a wild west a little bit in terms of figuring out how the all OEMs want to integrate in this space. And I think at that, I'll hand it back over to you. Also happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Jamie. Yeah, if anyone's got any questions, please pop them into the chat, and we can respond to them. Otherwise, I'll just sort of crack on and dive into the deployment actually of the managed charging pilot. So just to sort of, I guess, set the stage and recap, we worked with Ameren last year, and their sort of objectives around managed EV charging were threefold. First, they wanted to support EV adoption among their customers by making EV charging simpler and easier. As Jamie mentioned, EV adoption obviously increases the number of kilowatt hours that a utility sells, and that can always sort of put some downward pressure on rates, which is sort of good for everyone. Beyond that, they also wanted to look at ways to sort of help save the customer money when they were charging their EV at home. And so Ameren had a couple of nice kind of time varying rates. One is an hourly price rate in Illinois. Another one is just a static time of use in Missouri. We'll talk through those in a moment, but they were really sort of eager to see how those could actually be leveraged to save EV customers money on their home charging. Again, the idea of, you reduce the total cost of ownership of an EV, you reduce the cost of charging, you make it as simple as possible, you support EV adoption. And then the final one was Ameren had recently developed a DERMS platform, and they wanted to start looking at using EVs as a localized source of network flexibility. And that's a great thing about managed EV charging platforms like EV.Energy, is we know the vehicle or the EVSE's location, and we can provide targeted load reduction down to sort of the feeder or transformer level. And so kind of with that, Ameren selected EV.Energy as its partner for this. And maybe just to sort of give everyone a little bit of an overview on what we do before we kind of dive into how it was deployed. EV.Energy offers kind of an end-to-end platform for utilities to manage EV charging on their network. So on the back end, we'll integrate with the utility network. We integrate with DERMS platforms. We are OpenADR 2.0 compatible, and we provide utilities kind of the central data portal, number one, to view sort of all EV charging that's happening across their network, both historic as well as forecast loads and flexibility levels. And secondly, we offer the utility the ability to sort of actively and dynamically optimize load according to one or multiple variables. And I'll talk about that in a moment, but that could be everything from a sort of static, kind of grid signal, very standard kind of peak off peak, to even something a bit more dynamic, including sort of rapid load curtailment or load reduction signals with, sort of within even as little as 30 minutes, or sort of an integration into a DERMS platform where we're also taking the entire load that might be on, let's say, a feeder line, and optimizing EV loads around that within the feeder's constraints. Now, of course, those are sort of the signals that our algorithm will get to kind of optimize the charging. But how do we actually control the charging? We do that through a couple of the means that Jamie outlined on one of her previous slides, and that's through vehicle telematic APIs as well as networked EVSEs. We are really focused on, number one, maximizing load control for utilities, and number two, maximizing customer eligibility for these kinds of programs. And as Jamie mentioned before, not every OEM offers APIs that really allow for managed charging. Some OEMs also do not have telematics capabilities built into their vehicles. And so we also have to look elsewhere to, sort of maximize load control. That's why we also look at EVSEs. But just to sort of give you an overview of the vehicles we can manage charging on, today it's Tesla, Volkswagen, who we've got a global partnership with, Jaguar Land Rover as well. We are also connecting to Nissan, Hyundai, and Kia vehicles. Unfortunately, these vehicle OEMs APIs do not allow us to actively manage charging. However, we are able to connect to those vehicles and collect the charging data, which can be very valuable to utilities in a number of different use cases, everything from looking at kind of EV loads across the network and charging patterns to doing sort of what I would call like passive managed charging. That's really where the customer might be adhering to just their time of use schedule, or maybe some sort of incentive program that the utility is offering, and we're then able to verify that the customer, let's say, avoided charging between 4 and 7 p.m. And we help the utility verify that and reward them for that behavior. On our roadmap, again, I would say the EV landscape in the US is evolving very quickly. Yesterday we saw the debut of the F-150 Lightning, which is really exciting. So new OEMs are entering the space every day and really stepping up their game. And it's our personal belief that we're going to need to have more than just Tesla to really sort of effectively manage charging for utilities. So we're working on APIs right now with BMW Mini, Audi is in the pipeline as well, and of course Chevy, with more to be added to the list later this year. And then on the networked EVSE side, our platform is OCPP compatible, so we tend to do this with OCPP chargers. In the US, that's ChargePoint, Siemens, and Schneider Electric. We also have a significant presence in the UK and Europe, where we work with other OCPP EVSE manufacturers over there, including Rolec, Intric, Heba, and Elfin. And then the kind of customer-facing side of this is an app that we've built for EV drivers to use. I think Jamie's point earlier that the customer preferences are kind of like the number one priority, and we have found anyway that the only way to really make managed EV charging programs work and effective and keep customers enrolled and engaged in these programs is through some sort of customer-facing portal. Obviously, a smartphone app is sort of the easiest way to do that. And we've actually spent years sort of building and refining and continuously developing this app. We also white label it for utilities. It doesn't just have to be an EV.Energy green. It could be customized. But what this does is a few things. Number one, it allows the customer to be in control of their charging. So we ask them one question, which is, what time do you need your car ready by? The customer will enter a ready by time, and then we promise to always have that vehicle charged by the customer's ready by time. And we then work with the utility to sort of optimize that charging schedule according to whatever signals or constraints they're giving us. As Jamie also said, the driver needs to be in control. So we've got a boost button where the customer can override managed charging temporarily. If, let's say, they get home, they don't want to wait till off-peak hours to charge, they've got to run out and pick up their kids later, they just need to start charging immediately. They hit the boost button, it overrides managed charging, and it will charge on peak. Now, of course, we'll deliver a nudge to the customer, letting them know, hey, are you sure you want to boost? This is going to X dollars more, on your rate plan. But if they do, we boost, we deliver the charge, and we provide transparency over the costs. An app like this as well also allows us to deliver a bunch of other services, both for the utility and the customer. So we're able to deliver push notifications. This is particularly useful for kind of dynamic demand response events. Or other reasons why maybe a utility would want to notify the customer about something. So that could be everything from a public safety power shutoff in California to a demand response event that's happening maybe in their local network, maybe even to a specific program or service that they want to promote to the customer. So we're able to do all of that through the app. And then just to give an overview of what we did with Ameren last summer. So this was summer 2020. Obviously not a great time in the country with COVID and COVID cases. So everything had to be entirely remote, and that is a great, I would say, a great benefit of this sort of telematic managed charging. Is that doesn't require any physical presence, doesn't require any electrician to install. We just deploy our app to the App Store, the customer downloads it, they connect their vehicle, they set a ready by time, and then that's it. So we were able to do this entirely remotely to 40 Tesla drivers across Missouri and Illinois, which is Ameren service territory. And Ameren wanted to test a few things. So we kind of divided these 40 Teslas into 4 groups of 10, each of which had their charging optimized according to a different variable. So there was one group that had their charging optimized to time of day pricing. So this was a kind of like a pilot time of use rate that Ameren Missouri was testing in Illinois, sort of a very kind of basic static time of use rate with peak and off-peak hours. They also wanted to look at hourly pricing, and to Jamie's point earlier, for kind of static time of use, indeed, that's something that a customer could maybe program into their vehicle or charger. Anything dynamic, though, including sort of hourly pricing or demand response, load curtailment, whatever the case may be, is unfortunately not going to be able to be managed by by the customer themselves or through a vehicle timer. That needs to be done in a more dynamic way. And so we looked at optimizing EV charging to the lowest price hours for customers in Illinois on Ameren's Power Smart Pricing rate plan. They also wanted to look at the ability to optimize EV charging around grid emissions. So what we did was we built an API with MISO that publishes a daily generation forecast, kind of hour by hour, and we are then able to kind of calculate the average carbon intensity of a kilowatt hour of electricity hour by hour, depending on the mix between nuclear, coal, gas, solar, wind, hydro, and so on. And we looked always to sort of charge EVs during the least carbon intense times on the MISO grid. And finally, as I mentioned, Ameren's distributed technologies team was testing on a DERMS platform, and we wanted to kind of simulate how we would sort of curtail or shift EV charging loads on a sort of a virtual 12 kilovolt feeder, and sort of keep EV charging loads within the limits that Ameren set for that particular feeder. So I will dive into the results, kind of just take you one by one through each group. So for the folks on the sort of static time of use rate in Missouri, what we were able to do was, first we did just a couple of weeks of charging baselining, and we just sort of looked at, baseline customer behaviors. When does kind of EV charging occur? No surprise, a fair bit of it kind of takes place during that evening peak. In this case, about 40% was happening between that 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. window, when time of use rates exceeded 30 cents per kilowatt hour. And then once we got them connected to EV.Energy and started actively managing their charging, we were able to shift 80% of that load to off-peak times. Often that's not really a big deal to the customer at all. They need their car ready, maybe by the next morning. And as long as we're able to sort of shift it to overnight or whenever they need it, they're really happy as long as they wake up to a fully charged vehicle. They're even happier when they save money doing so. And the kind of the average savings on this time of use rate, I think particularly due to the very sort of large price difference between peak and off-peak hours, average about $11 per month for this cohort. So, annualized, that's over $100 a year, which is quite a significant chunk of money, I think, for a lot of people. You will see that a little bit of charging still did happen during these peak hours, kind of in blue on the right-hand side, and that's because, as I explained earlier, we do allow the customer, to boost and override managed charging, and sometimes this is aggregated over the entire pilot. There were a few instances where customers needed to charge during peak times, needed to boost. We allow them to do that. We nudge them. We provide them transparency over the additional costs. But I think the real sort of goal, I think particularly from an integrated utility like Ameren, is just to shift as much load as possible to off-peak. Doesn't have to be 100%. 80% is often good enough. Then just to look at the hourly pricing cohort. So this is actually, it's really cool. Illinois has got this sort of hourly pricing market that's linked to the day ahead prices in their wholesale market. That obviously provides a much more kind of dynamic thing that we're optimizing around. And so when we looked at some of the charging that was happening again during kind of the baseline period, again, kind of no surprise, a lot of it kind of took place during those evening hours, and that's when the hourly price tended to kind of go up from its low point of around maybe 2 cents a kilowatt hour up to kind of 4 or 4.5 cents a kilowatt hour. What we were able to do with EV.Energy was actually shift 90% of that charging to the lowest price hours when the price kind of fell below 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. I mean, due to the smaller price difference on something like Power Smart pricing, the savings were definitely a bit lower. They were only about $3 a month, so savings not as great there. But we did get a lot of good feedback from the customers in this cohort, just because obviously hourly pricing is really hard to optimize around. You can't set a timer for it, and they really sort of liked the ability for a third-party app to just kind of optimize this for them, often while they were sleeping. Maybe just a little bit of context as well. We are very active in the UK energy market as well, where we've got actually tens of thousands of EVs in the UK that are on our platform. One of the most popular price plans in the UK's competitive retail electricity market comes from an energy company called Octopus Energy. And they offer something called an agile tariff, which varies by the half hour, also linked to the UK's wholesale energy prices. And the UK has built a lot of offshore wind, and for anyone who's been there, doesn't have the greatest weather. So they often get some pretty strong storms and sort of a lot of strong winds in the North Sea that actually send power prices negative. And Octopus Energy offers negative pricing on this price plan. So we've actually got thousands of EV drivers in the UK using EV.Energy to optimize around this price plan. And actually, on weeks like this, and the UK is experiencing a really kind of windy week, are actually waking up and finding that they were paid to charge their EV. So that's sort of a really nice feature. Onto the carbon optimization cohort. So again, and I think we sort of see a pattern here. There's definitely some hours just in general within MISO and Ameren service territory that are just not great to charge at all. For both price and carbon intensity purposes. And indeed, the generation mix in MISO kind of during the daytime is pretty high. Due to sort of higher energy demand and some peaker plants going on, and then really sort of dips in the overnight hours. And so what we did was shift kind of 85% of that charging to occur during those sort of lowest carbon overnight hours, to reduce the carbon intensity of the electricity that was going to charge these EVs. And so that resulted in an average of 112 pounds of CO2 per customer per month, reduced by kind of shifting the charging to the lower carbon hours. So annualized, that's about over 1,000 pounds of CO2, which is enough for a round trip flight from New York to London. So definitely not insignificant CO2 savings there. And certainly as the MISO grid further decarbonizes and you've got more kind of intermittent renewables being put onto the grid, I think the carbon savings potential there will become even greater. I mean, certainly we see in California, where we're quite active, the difference, particularly in the springtime, between kind of the shoulder overnight hours in California and the real plunge in carbon intensity that happens during the daytime when you've got a lot of solar generation, can be really significant. And EV.Energy is working with a few utilities and CCAs out in California to kind of shift that EV charging into those lower carbon daytime hours and reward customers for it. And I'll talk through that in just a few slides. And just really finally on the grid intensity. So the way that we did this was there weren't quite enough EVs to really sort of make a meaningful difference on a 12 kilovolt feeder. So what we did was we got kind of historic data from this feeder from Ameren's distributed technologies team, and then kind of extrapolated the 10 EVs that we had to if they were 100, let's say, and overlaid that demand onto the signal that we got from the feeder, and kind of overlaid the EV load onto the existing residential load. And tried to keep EV charging within the kind of upper limit, 4.5 megawatt upper limit that was given to us by the distributed technologies team. And so that's pretty hard to visualize over sort of such a long period, but just to sort of give you an example of one kind of event where I remember actually this day, it was a really hot summer day in August. air conditioning loads really sort of ramped up in the afternoon hours, and so the load that we got on this feeder was actually quite high. But of course, we did have some EV charging happening. And so, using kind of that signal from the feeder, what we did was overlay, the EV load on top, look to kind of shift, avoid, or curtail any charging that would cause this feeder to kind of exceed its upper limit, this sort of virtual upper limit that we were given. And then sort of resume the charging again once the feeder once the load on the feeder dropped below that 4.5 megawatt limit. And so we did this sort of 40 times over the course of the summer. And I think it's sort of a great example of how EVs actually can really be used as kind of a dynamic source of flexibility, not only at the grid level, but even sort of at the localized parts of the network. Jamie might have some thoughts here, but I think particularly in the early days of EV adoption, where I think we still are. I think EV adoption tends to be sort of quite localized and almost unequal to a certain extent. And we tend to see a lot of EVs kind of clustered on different parts of the network, primarily in kind of affluent communities where, one person might get a Tesla and it's in their driveway, and then, 6 to 12 months later, half the block has got a Tesla. And that can cause significant but very localized stress and constraints on the network. And we're sort of looking at ways that we can kind of avoid that as EV adoption accelerates.
I have a quick comment for a second. I often have a slide when I'm talking about EV load shapes, and I'll have an adoption. And one of the slides I have is kind of EVs are different. They're not heat pumps. It's anyway. The way they get adopted, as Joseph was commenting on, is in a clustered way, at least is what we're seeing so far. And so when we talk about kind of the effects on the grid, they move, which can be a disadvantage because modeling them is hard. But also, to his point just now, they move and we know where they are in this capacity. And so being able to do kind of localized load shifting based on this vehicle location information is a pretty neat application.
Indeed. And maybe just to sort of sum up, some of the key learnings that we took out of this pilot. I think number one, that vehicle telematics in particular are a really kind of low cost, efficient, and scalable way to actively manage EV charging. I think it was sort of like particularly pronounced during the early days of the COVID pandemic, but sort of very easy to deploy remotely at scale, no installation, no special hardware. Pretty low cost for the utility and the customer. I think that's sort of another important point as well. We think about, or I think utilities are starting to think about managing EV charging away from kind of like a hardware approach to more of a wireless approach. And when you think about kind of the costs of those kinds of things, whether it's an EVSE that needs to be rebated or just a charger, that a customer has to buy themselves, that's a significant cost to the customer and could definitely leave a lot of folks in the community out of these kinds of programs. And so to a certain extent, telematics can kind of help with that as a non-hardware option. I think the other thing to note as well is that the accuracy of what you're getting from vehicle telematics in terms of the load data and the charging data may not be considered meter grade. So that is, I think, something that we sort of are continuing to work through, and probably is going to require a little bit of regulatory innovation as well. I can maybe share a couple of sort of reflections here. I think first, we work with a number of CCAs in California to claim the LCFS, low carbon fuel standard credits, from EV charging. And CARB, the California Air Resources Board, will accept telematics data and consider it to be sort of equivalent to what you would get from the EVSE. So for these kinds of purposes, sort of good, more than good enough. In the UK, where we have quite a presence as well, and we actually sort of look at rebating customers for some of their off-peak charging for electricity retailers who maybe don't offer kind of a two-tiered kind of time of use rate. Instead, we're doing like an off-peak rebate. We've had to prove to the regulator that, you know, when we are rebating, we are always kind of acting in the customer's interest and rounding up in the customer's favor. So with vehicle telematics, where you've got maybe a margin of error of plus or minus 2 or 2.5%, you know, essentially what we've done, and the regulator has said that they're comfortable with this. You know, we'll just sort of round, you know, kind of either round the rebate up or round the consumption down in the customer's favor where there might be a margin of error. And that kind of makes is sort of a pretty straightforward way to still be able to leverage telematics for these kinds of programs, get around maybe some of the data quality issues, and make sure that you're always kind of acting in the customer's favor and keeping your regulator happy. Just sort of second, I think, you know, these kind of managed EV charging programs can probably deliver multiple objectives at once for a utility. I think, as we saw before, a lot of the sort of hours that we're optimizing against or away from kind of tend to coincide, right? What you really kind of primarily want to be doing is avoiding that kind of evening peak. Both for, you know, price purposes, for network purposes, even for carbon intensity purposes. And managed EV charging can often sort of achieve multiple objectives at once, which is a really great kind of selling point when you're going to the regulator for such a program. I think the last one as well is that you know, gamified incentives can be a really effective way to get customers to stick with managed EV charging. So in the case of this pilot with Ameren, actually, the customers who were on sort of the time of use or the hourly pricing rates were given the option to donate their savings to charity, which was a really nice motivator. And for those who were doing the carbon intensity or the demand response events, they actually earn points for their participation, which is available in the EV.Energy app. We've got a rewards panel. We award them a point for every eligible charging session, which can then be redeemed for either a gift card that we administer, or in this case, again, it was a donation to a charity of their choice. So these are really sort of nice ways to kind of deliver these kinds of programs where maybe number one, a utility has only got a flat rate in place, or number two, the utility wants to deliver maybe some sort of incentives off bill, and either, you know, the rate case doesn't support it or the billing systems don't support it. There is always sort of these off bill ways of rewarding the customer for managed charging. Great. Any questions on the pilot? Otherwise, I had just maybe a couple of additional use cases of sort of slightly different flavors of managed EV charging programs that might be interesting to folks on the call.
This is Peter Milberg with Ameren. I love this information, right? I've worked up with the pricing program for about a decade. Seeing your ability to further leverage that is terrific. And you may be getting ready to touch on this, so I apologize if I'm jumping the gun, but I think you said before this works in the other direction too, that it could be optimized for discharging as well as charging, because we don't own generation, so we buy everything on the market. So if we can incent, you know, purchases overnight and then they shove it back into the system during high price times, we don't care. You know, we're held whole, and it helps reduce peak. So again, I apologize if I'm jumping the gun, but would look forward to you addressing that, please.
Yeah, it's a great question. And just to make sure I understood it correctly, are you referring to like vehicle to grid, where the vehicle's battery would be discharged back onto the grid?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And so I think it's a very clear use case for managed charging. So we don't do this currently, and that's due to a couple of reasons. First, we primarily focus on residential EV charging, and I think vehicle to grid, especially where you are discharging the battery, can be a little bit of a tough sell for kind of your mainstream residential customer who, just kind of thinks about, okay, well, what if it's like 3 a.m. and I need to take my kid to the hospital and you've just like discharged my entire battery back onto the grid? I'm not sure if Jamie has sort of thoughts on this. I think that the second challenge is actually more of a hardware issue, and it's just the simple fact that most OEMs don't offer hardware to really support vehicle to grid today. The only one that I know of that's sort of commercially available in the market is Nissan. I do know that through and this is now public, our partnership with Volkswagen, it's been announced that all the new ID models from 2022 will have vehicle to grid capabilities.
Yeah, I think that was a good response there. I think my limiting factor would err on the hardware side, as you just said. It's an interesting application. The residential part is hard. I think where we've sort of seen the vehicle to grid kind of coming to light are, things we can more easily predict their use patterns. So like a school bus that would be parked in the middle of the day, or kind of other kind of fleet applications. But yeah, right now we're mostly limited by the hardware.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Great. Well, then maybe if we've got just a bit of time, I'll just quickly talk through a couple of other use cases that that might be interesting. So I think kind of combining a couple of elements from this pilot, which is aligning EV charging with renewable generation, which is increasingly important as more utility scale renewables come online, and also this kind of dynamic real-time optimization. Combined with real sort of customer engagement is one thing that we've deployed with Silicon Valley Clean Energy. We work with Silicon Valley Clean Energy at scale across their service territory through a program called GridShift. It's their kind of branded managed EV charging program. We've kind of customized the EV.Energy app for SVCE to their coloring, and we've got some features as well. And here, actually, we are primarily optimizing customers' charging along their time of use rates. So number one, always save them money. But what we've noticed as the pandemic sort of wore on is more folks are sort of staying plugged in for longer, right, as they're working from home. And, California, of course, has got this duck curve issue, right, where there's a lot of sort of excess solar generation that sometimes needs to be curtailed during daytime hours because it's not being utilized. So we actually looked at, can we redispatch EV charging to some of these really sort of low carbon daytime hours when solar generation is particularly abundant, get the customer to buy into that and incentivize them for letting us do that. So this was actually something that we deployed with Silicon Valley Clean Energy called low carbon events. And the way it works is the customer receives a push notification before what we classify as a low carbon event. And EV.Energy's algorithm basically has an integration with CAISO and their generation mix. And we get both 7-day ahead and 4-day ahead and 24-hour generation forecasts. Now, based on those forecasts, if there are 2 or more consecutive hours where the average carbon intensity of generation falls below 50% of the monthly average, that is like particularly low carbon for that given month, we will call a low carbon event. And SVCE customers receive a push notification in the app alerting them that typically the following day, there's going to be abundant solar generation. Please don't charge your car overnight if you can. Please wait till the morning to plug in. And then EV.Energy will automatically redispatch that charging to align with the low carbon generation. So that's sort of what you see in the middle here. And the kind of the purple is a typical carbon intensity curve for California. And what you see are those sort of higher carbon shoulders where the sun isn't shining kind of overnight, and then a very steep dip during the day when solar comes online. And so as long as the customer opts into the event, we'll redispatch their charging. And then the customer will be rewarded with that for that behavior with a cash rebate. And so that's kind of averaging about $10 a month for customers at the moment. And this has been really cool to test out and deploy because a similar approach could also be used to respond to public safety power shutoffs or wildfires as well, maybe extreme weather, where a utility needs to alert the customer to some sort of event, let them know that their typical charging behavior might need to change, offer them an automatic way to optimize and redispatch that charging, and reward them as well, and actually have them sort of see that reward appear fairly immediately after the event. So actually now as we sort of move into the summer season, we're repurposing these with Silicon Valley Clean Energy into what we call grid reliability events. So that will range from everything from KISO Flex Alerts, which is really sort of about power reduction during critical hours, to even looking at some more sort of wholesale market optimization as well, when power prices get really high over the summer in California. And just sort of similar as well, I think this is kind of related to the DERMS topic before with Ameren. We've also started participating in ERCOT's emergency response service in Texas. So following the February 2021 blackouts, we kind of realized, hey, we've got actually a bunch of EVs on our platform in Texas. This is kind of a virtual power plant that could be used to provide some grid reliability and flexibility, and curtail EV charging during really critical hours. And ERCOT's got a demand response market called the Emergency Response Service. And we partnered with a company called Leap, who basically already was active and participating in this market, to deliver EV load curtailment and flexibility within ERCOT. And just to sort of show some preliminary results from this, as we sort of test it out, generally what we're finding is that, when we look at flexible capacity and the ability to deliver EV load flexibility, varies a little bit by the day of the week. Weekdays tend to actually have more connected flexible EV capacity than weekends, just because I guess more folks are sort of in the pattern of kind of commuting and coming home and plugging in during the week. And that really, again, kind of tends to peak around the kind of, the evening hours. ERCOT offers different contract periods, and kind of that 7 to 10 p.m. contract period seems to be best suited for EV flexibility. And then in terms of our ability to kind of reduce load, what we've been finding is that kind of on average, an EV provides about 0.8 kilowatts of flexible load in a load curtailment event. And that might be maybe a little bit surprising because, typically EVs that are charging on level 2, that could be anywhere from kind of 7 to 11 or 12 kilowatts. But this figure is kind of averaged out, right? Because an EV is not always plugged in and charging all the time. So it's not necessarily, across a portfolio, not every EV is charging and therefore able to offer, that 7 kilowatts of load reduction potential. And also, some customers may need to maybe boost or continue charging, and really, to Jamie's point earlier, they need to remain in control, and you do need to give them the option to kind of opt out. So what we're seeing there is sort of 0.8 kilowatts of flexible load that we're getting in Texas at the moment. Great. And I'm conscious we're sort of reaching the top of the hour and wanted to leave a few final minutes for Q&A.
All right. Well, we will be sending out this presentation, and the recording link once we have that up on YouTube. So early next week, to everybody that joined us today. Thank you again. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Ameren, for such a great project. And stay tuned. We'll be doing one of these again next month with one of our other 2020 cohort participants, Gridfruit. So looking forward to that. And again, thank you. Have a happy Friday and a great weekend, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Joseph.
Thank you so much.
Bye.